Alongside a brutal communist dictator, Obama used his infamous pen and his huge ego this weekend to save our planet from humans and the essential to life gas carbon dioxide they all exhale. At least that is what the would-be savior of the planet wants people to think. In the city of Hangzhou, China, Obama announced his pretended ratification of a massive United Nations treaty on alleged man-made global warming, working in tandem with communist Chinese dictators Xi Jinping and Beijing's rubber-stamp legislature. Congress, though, was not consulted, and federal law prohibits compliance with the UN scheme. The two increasingly despotic rulers made the historic announcement at the G20 meeting of governments and dictators, being led by the brutal regime in Beijing, as a way of encouraging their counterparts around the world to hurry up. Their fear is that a potential President Donald Trump takes over and makes good on his pledge to cancel the UN deal. Members of Congress, too, denounced Obama's lawless bid to bypass the U.S. Senate and predicted that the UN's Paris Agreement on climate was already doomed. As bombastic as ever, perhaps bordering on a dangerous messianic complex, Obama declared in China on Saturday that, "Someday we may see this as the moment that we finally decided to save our planet." Of course, in the real world, Obama's submission of his fake ratification instrument to the UN treaty is legally meaningless. The U.S. Constitution is clear that treaties can only be ratified by a two-thirds majority of the U.S. Senate, not by Obama's pen. And even then, they need to be constitutional, which the Paris Agreement is not. Still, the UN, Obama, and largely tax-funded global warming alarmists are all pretending that the United States and the American people are now bound by the UN's Paris Agreement. I, Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, having seen and considered the Paris Agreement, done at Paris on December 12, 2015, and signed on behalf of the United States of America on April 22, 2016, do hereby accept the said agreement and every article and clause thereof on behalf of the United States of America, Obama wrote in his bogus ratification instrument. But before Obama even made his statement in communist China about saving our planet from the gas of life, leading members of Congress were already debunking it. This latest announcement is the president attempting to once again give the international community the appearance that he can go around Congress in order to achieve his unpopular and widely rejected climate agenda for his legacy, said U.S. Senator James Inhofe, Republican Oklahoma, chairman of the powerful Senate Environment and Public Works Committee that oversees federal environmental policy. Senator Inhofe, who has regularly denounced what he and other top lawmakers refer to as the global warming hoax, also demolished Obama's fake legal reasoning. The Senate does not support the Paris Agreement, which is why his administration prefers to not call it a treaty, and the centerpiece of the president's emission reduction commitments, the Clean Power Plan, is on shaky legal ground, which the United States Supreme Court recently affirmed, Inhofe added in the statement. The Oklahoma senator has been pointing out since the UN Climate Summit in Paris that any treaty or pseudo-treaty purporting to bind the United States was as good as dead. History already shows that this Paris Agreement will fail, he continued. Half of the countries that were legally bound to the UN Kyoto Protocol Treaty failed to adhere to their pledges, and the host country of Japan even increased their carbon emissions. The U.S. government never joined that one, either. Senator Inhofe also pointed out that despite his pledges and promises, Obama could not implement his climate agenda without legislation from Congress. Furthermore, environmental groups and industry agree that the U.S. commitments made under the Paris Agreement cannot be met with regulations and would require legislation from Congress that will never pass, the senator explained, echoing comments by numerous experts. The Constitution, too, is clear. Obama's job is to defend the Constitution and execute the laws, not pretend to rule Americans by imperial decree like some sort of tin-pot dictator lording over a banana republic. Still, Obama, perhaps thinking he was fooling somebody, or maybe hoping to deceive foreign governments and dictators assembled in China to promote more globalism, pretended that the UN scheme was a done deal. This year, in 2016, we meet again to commit formally to joining the agreement ahead of schedule, creating the prospect that the agreement might enter into force ahead of schedule, he claimed. The United States and China are taking that step today, as our two nations formally join the Paris Agreement. The UN, Obama, and Beijing claim the deal goes into force when 55 governments overseeing 55% of global CO2 emissions sign up. Without Senate ratification, though, America has joined nothing, either formally or informally. Indeed, the courts, Congress, the next president, and state governments can all quash Obama's illegal pseudo-treaty with virtually no effort at all. Already, all of those are taking or have taken steps to quash the scheme and the associated regulations. Ironically, federal law also already officially prohibits Obama from complying with the Paris Agreement. When the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFC, accepted the State of Palestine as a member, a Clinton-era law immediately triggered a federal funding ban on the UN bureaucracy and any of its sub-agencies. That means the US government is forbidden by US law from complying with the agreement, Obama's bombastic statements to the contrary notwithstanding. The White House has not said what it plans to do about that inconvenient truth. Bizarrely, Obama also used the announcement to brag about his close collaboration with the Chinese dictatorship, which has murdered more human beings than any other government in human history. The United States and China were central to that effort, Obama said about his climate scheming. Over the past few years, our joint leadership on climate has been one of the most significant drivers of global action. President Xi and One intend to continue working together in the months ahead to make sure our countries lead on climate. Our teams have worked together and developed a strong relationship that should serve us very well. Ironically, despite Obama's outlandish pro-Beijing remarks, his ruthless communist hosts mocked and ridiculed him from the moment Air Force One touched down on Chinese soil. While government leaders from other G20 governments got the red carpet treatment, literally, as they got off their tax-funded jets, Obama did not even get a staircase to disembark, forcing him to go down Air Force One's rear set of built-in steps to be greeted by a no-name vice minister of the brutal dictatorship. Obama warned so-called journalists traveling with him and dutifully parroting his comments not to overcrank the significance of the historic and deliberate snub. But it hardly passed unnoticed. Of course, the radical UN climate regime was an easy deal for the communist Chinese dictatorship to sign. Under the Paris Agreement and Obama's illegal pledges made as part of it, the United States economy is supposed to slash emissions of CO2 by almost 30% from 2005 levels over the next 10 years. The amount of economic pain associated with that, Obama summarized it well when he declared that electricity rates will necessarily skyrocket, is going to be immense. With prices of everything set to surge as energy prices skyrocket, in Obama's words, poor and middle-class Americans will be the most devastated. There will also be a mass exodus of remaining U.S. jobs. On the other hand, under the UN scheme, China will continue to increase its emissions for at least a decade and a half. Indeed, under the Paris climate regime, Beijing's shrewd rulers agreed to peak the CO2 emissions of their 1.3 billion victims by 2030, long after the US economy has been completely crippled and the American middle class destroyed. Plus, anyone who believes a pledge by a mass-murdering communist dictatorship, whether on CO2 emissions or nuclear weapons or anything else, must be completely ignorant of 20th century history. U.S. lawmakers, though, pointed out many of those facts. Senator Inhofe, for example, described the UN's Paris Agreement as a win for China and a loss for the United States. While Beijing promises to increase its use of energy and coal in particular, The White House promises unrealistic and economically harmful emissions of up to 28% that will send more jobs overseas and reduce our global competitiveness in the marketplace. Now we find ourselves celebrating an agreement where the world's largest carbon emitter, China, is permitted to increase their emissions until 2025 and to continue bringing a coal-fired power plant online every 10 days. Inhofe continued. We even turn a blind eye to the fact that China lied about its carbon emissions when it first came to the table with its pledge last year. It's no wonder Americans will never support this deal. He is right. In surveys, just 40% of Americans even agree with the increasingly discredited man-made global warming theory, much less the globalist pro-Beijing policy schemes the theory underpins. In short, if it were to remain in place, this climate regime all but assures communist Chinese economic dominance and continued American decline while doing literally nothing for the environment. Unsurprisingly, authoritarian Communist Party of China chief Xi was pleased with it, too. China and the United States have expanded dialogue and achieved fruitful results in recent years to tackle global climate challenges. The dictator, described as president by his media propagandists, was quoted as saying in the regime's official propaganda organs. In a sad spectacle considering Obama's efforts, even communist Chinese propaganda organs highlighted the need for legislative involvement in treaty ratification around the world, something Obama is seeking to bypass with his fake ratification while even Beijing's legislature gets included. Commitment and efforts being made by the two countries, Obama and the regime in Beijing, send strong signals to other G20 members to quicken the pace of their own legislative process, said climate and policy researcher Bai Yundwin at Greenovation Hub, a Beijing-based, communist-controlled non-governmental organization that does the bidding of China's Communist Party tyrants. While practically everybody understands the absurdity of it all, the Paris Agreement is based on the ludicrous premise that if enough wealth is transferred from the West's dying middle classes to the UN and its largely autocratic member regimes, the temperature of the Earth can be precisely controlled. That is beyond ridiculous. Secondly, Obama's pledges are based on the idea that the scheme is what the administration calls an executive agreement that can bypass Congress. Yet another absurdity. By being forced into this position, though, Obama and the global warming alarmists have already lost the war. In essence, they are building the foundation of their would-be global climate regime on quicksand that will ultimately swallow up and devour the whole scam. Still, Americans must remain vigilant and active. To ensure the survival of liberty, self-government, national sovereignty, and economic prosperity, the man-made global warming theory and the associated totalitarian policies it underpins must continue